Shabbat Shalom. Today, I'd like to talk about the spirit of the commandments. This parasha begins with a beautiful captive who becomes the wife of the captor and ends with a commandment to erase Amalek. In between, we read about the relationship between a man and his two wives, their sons, and the division of their shared property. This parasha speaks of returning lost objects to their rightful owner. Today, that could mean a phone or a wallet that we have found. The parasha also speaks about the ban on causing animals unnecessary suffering. There are many other commandments, some that are simple and understandable, and others that are impractical for today. There is a long and undecided debate over the reason and the how of keeping commandments. There are those who say that one should not seek the purpose of the commandment, but rather accept it as given. The idea views the all-knowing God, the master of everything, in contrast with humans who do not know and do not need to know everything. We do not see the full picture. Maybe one day it will become clear to us. The mere fulfillment of the commandments indicates the depth of our faith in obedience to God, especially when the reason for the commandment is unclear to us. On the other hand, there are those who seek to know the purpose of the commandment for a number of reasons. They wish to understand them so they can fulfill them with joy and to renew them when the original validity of the commandments has expired. Now, both sides in this long discussion make a good point. In my opinion, it is important to study the spirit of the commandment so that we can properly implement the will of God. For example, in our weekly parasha, we are commanded to send a bird from the nest. If you come across a bird's nest beside the road, either on a tree or on the ground, and the mother is sitting on the young or on the eggs, do not take the mother with the young. You may take the young, but be sure to let the mother go, so that it may go well with you and you may have a long life. There are those who read this commandment and will actively look for a nest so they can fulfill this commandment. Then they send the mother away, take the eggs, even though the eggs are not edible. Others understand that the reason for the commandment of the nest is to prevent cruelty towards animals. If we want to eat eggs, don't take them when the mother is there. And also, don't endanger the species itself. We need to understand not to have a cruel heart. We should have compassion towards animals, and even more so for human beings. In this week's parasha, there are several commandments that sound rather embarrassing today. How can the Torah force the raped to marry the rapist without asking the woman's opinion or taking her feelings into account? It is clear that the commandment is considered irrelevant and practically cruel today. Yet another commandment in our parasha demands the execution of all adulterers. If we were to fulfill this commandment, half of today's society would find itself under a heap of stones. This leads to the conclusion that the Torah is not a fixed set of laws that cannot be changed. Reality is stronger than any commandment. There are commandments that are no longer valid unless they are revived by an intention that was concealed until now, just like in the court of law. Take, for example, the commandment of tithes, Numbers 18. Originally, this commandment intended for priests and Levites who do not have an inheritance and no ability to make a living. For this very reason, Israel is commanded to tithe. Today we do not have the temple, nor priests and Levites. So we, the people who want to serve the Lord, brought a new meaning to the commandment. Today we bring the tithe to the house of God, be it the church, the synagogue, or the congregation. The constant duty of the believer who wishes to fulfill the will of God is to examine the commandments in depth and to examine the spirit of the commandments. What is correct for the period of time we live in, and how can we do it best? There are commandments that are directed towards the enlightened and the moral sides of men. Yet, there are also commandments that serve as a compromise to the darker side of man. Our parasha recognizes and deals with both sides. On the one hand, for example, we have the obligation to foreigners, widows, and orphans to leave part of our crops and possessions. Here is a matter of righteousness. On the other hand, we have commandments that concern family problems and problems of power and greed. The Torah reminds the people of Israel over and over again, it was God who took Israel out of Egypt. We must never forget what was done to us in slavery as immigrants and as the weak and helpless. The spirit of the commandment is clear. Someone who helps the weak, the poor, the lonely, and who loves the foreigner, first and foremost, loves those closest to him. The love of the foreigner is the key to preventing war and striving for peace. Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. This is how we know that we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in His presence. It is relatively easy for a person to love those who are close to him. It is harder to show love to others and to strangers. Yet, the person who succeeds in doing so is at the top of the ladder of the commandments. Indeed, in doing so, he fulfills the purpose of the Torah. The source of love is God. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have eternal life. The Apostle Paul says, rightly, that when we act from love, that is, caring, forgiveness, patience, a desire to see good, a desire to help and support others, we fulfill the Torah. This is indeed the spirit of the Torah. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Who is others? Who do we need to love and to help? Yeshua's parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10, reminds us to help anyone who is in need of help. Shabbat Shalom.